"You're fired, we don't run a charity for washed-up soldiers," the words cut sharper than any blade, echoing across the dusty garage. What happens when kindness costs a mechanic his job? All he had done was fix a broken truck for a man who once wore a uniform, a hero the world had long forgotten. No bill, no fanfare, just quiet gratitude for sacrifices most will never understand. He never asked for anything in return, but real kindness, the kind given without expectation, always finds its way home, and sometimes the world remembers its silent heroes and answers their goodness with something even greater. Stay with us, because this is a story about loyalty, quiet courage, and a kindness that refused to stay invisible. Welcome to Graceful Valor Stories, where tales of compassion and kindness are told. Let's uncover what really happened. The old clock above Raymond's auto shop ticked loudly in the stale afternoon air. It was the kind of place you didn't notice unless you needed it. Rusty signs, grease-stained windows, the steady smell of burnt oil clinging to the walls, and in the far corner of the garage, beneath a flickering fluorescent light, worked Evan Cole, 26 years old, skin tanned by sun, hands roughened by years of turning wrenches, quiet, focused, the kind of worker who didn't need a supervisor breathing down his neck. Most customers didn't remember his name, just the way he said yes sir or no problem ma'am without ever looking for a tip, but the veterans did, the old ones especially, the ones who drove battered trucks, wore faded hats embroidered with military patches, and carried a weight in their eyes heavier than any load their vehicles had ever hauled. Evan noticed them. He always had. It started small, an oil change he didn't charge for, a tire patched and waved away with a smile, a battery replaced at cost. Though no one ever saw a receipt, he didn't make a show of it, didn't even tell them sometimes, just a silent line on the invoice, service rendered, paid in full. The veterans would nod, eyes glistening, pride forcing them to stuff a crumpled bill or two into the tip jar anyway, but Evan would always find a way to slip it back, maybe tucked under a windshield wiper, maybe folded into a glove box. It wasn't about charity, it was about respect. Of course, not everyone saw it that way. Todd Raymond, owner, manager, and chief accountant of the shop, didn't like anything he couldn't log on a spreadsheet. Every dollar counted, every free service was, in his eyes, a theft. "You're not running a soup kitchen," he barked once across the garage, tossing a clipboard onto the workbench. "You think handouts fix engines? You think they pay the electric bill?" Evan said nothing. He just wiped his hands on a rag, kept his head down, and turned back to the truck he was fixing, a '94 Ford Ranger, dented, rusted, but loved, the kind of truck a man keeps after a lifetime of carrying heavier burdens, the kind of truck that belonged to someone who had earned a little extra kindness, even if no one else saw it. That afternoon, as the sun dipped low and the world outside grew softer under the haze of dust and light, Evan finished tightening the last bolt under the hood. He leaned back, stretching sore shoulders, and caught sight of old Mr. Hargrove, a Navy vet who came in every third Tuesday, standing outside the office door, counting his worn bills. Slowly, Evan didn't think, he just moved, quietly, quickly, crossed out half the invoice with a grease-stained pen, marked it paid. Mr. Hargrove wouldn't notice until he was halfway home. By then, Evan would be elbow-deep in another engine, and Todd would already be back in his office, too busy balancing ledgers to care. It wasn't about the money, it never was. It was about remembering, about honoring something the world was too busy to see anymore, and Evan Cole had decided a long time ago he would rather be poor in dollars than bankrupt in dignity. Outside, a dusty American flag snapped in the wind above the garage. Inside, Evan wiped his hands clean, picked up the next work order, and moved on. No applause, no headlines, just another quiet debt repaid by a man who understood what debts were truly worth. What secret strength drives a mechanic to defy his boss? Stay tuned to Graceful Valor Stories to find out. It didn't take long. Todd Raymond might have missed one or two free repairs, but a half dozen that he noticed. The receipts didn't add up, the drawer at the end of the day came up light, and Todd didn't like anything he couldn't explain, especially when it cost him money. It happened late on a Thursday. The shop was quiet, most of the techs gone for the night, the scent of motor oil heavy in the cooling air. Evan was closing up, stacking toolboxes, wiping down the counters, when Todd's voice cracked across the garage like a hammer. "Office, now." Evan looked up, surprised, wiped his hands clean out of habit, and walked toward the small glass office, tucked in the corner. Todd was already behind his desk, red in the face, waving a stack of invoices. "You think I'm stupid, Cole?" Evan said nothing, just stood there, steady, waiting. Todd slapped the papers onto the desk. Missing charges, half-filled work orders, veterans coming in, rolling out, paying pennies. He leaned forward, sneering. "You fixing their cars out of the kindness of your heart, huh?" Evan finally spoke, voice quiet but unshakable. "They deserve it," Todd snorted. "They deserve a bill like everyone else. You think their sob stories keep my lights on? You think a metal pays for parts?" Evan didn't move, didn't flinch, he just said very simply, "Some debts aren't written on paper." For a moment, there was silence, heavy, electric, and then Todd laughed, a cold, mean sound, save the hero speeches. He spat, "This ain't a charity, this is a business, and you're fired, effective immediately." Evan nodded, once, no argument, no excuses. He walked back to his station, rolled up his few tools, and packed them into a battered canvas bag. As he slung it over his shoulder, he looked around. The garage one last time, the grease-stained floors, the battered lift, the dusty flag above the door. This had been his place, his battlefront. Now it was just another address he would leave behind. Outside, the sun was setting, burning the horizon in deep gold and crimson. Evan stepped into the parking lot, the heavy door thudding shut behind him. No one followed, no one said goodbye. He paused by his old pickup truck, the one he kept alive with scraps and stubbornness, and glanced once more at the building. No regrets. Some things were worth more than a paycheck, some things were worth walking away for. He slid into the driver's seat, turned the key, and rumbled out onto the empty street above the garage. The flag still snapped in the wind, but Evan didn't look back. He had chosen his road, and wherever it led, he knew it was the right one. 2 days after Evan walked away, a black Ford F-250 pulled into the cracked parking lot of Raymond's auto shop. The man who stepped out wasn't looking for an oil change. Samuel Hartman wore an old brown jacket, jeans, and scuffed boots. To anyone passing by, he looked like just another aging contractor, maybe a farmer. No one noticed the way he moved, the steadiness that never quite left a soldier. No one noticed the sharpness in his eyes. He had come not as a customer, but as a buyer. Samuel had built his auto empire from scratch after retiring from the military. Now he was looking to expand, and Raymond's lot, sitting right off the new bypass, was prime real estate. Inside the shop buzzed with the usual noise, air compressors humming, wrenches clattering, country music playing low from an old radio. Todd Raymond sat behind the counter, nursing a coffee, half-heartedly scrolling through listings on his laptop. When Samuel pushed through the door, the little bell overhead jingled. Todd looked up, uninterested. "You need something, old man?" he muttered. Samuel smiled thinly. "Your name's Hartman," he said, interested in talking business. That got Todd's attention. Business meant money. Todd stood up quickly, brushing crumbs from his shirt, plastering on a fake smile. They moved into the back office. Todd talked fast, bragging about location, low overhead, steady flow of customers. Samuel listened, letting the man ramble, and then, inevitably, Todd veered off script. "You know, this place could have been a gold mine already," Todd said, leaning back in his chair. "If I didn't have to clean up after bleeding hearts." Samuel tilted his head slightly, masking his reaction. Todd chuckled, waving a hand like it was a joke. "Had this kid working here, Evan, something, kept fixing up junkers for free, especially for those crusty old vets, thinking they deserve special treatment." He laughed again, sharper this time. "Had to fire him. Can't run a charity for a bunch of broken-down war heroes." The room went still. Samuel Hartman sat perfectly calm, but inside him something ancient stirred, a cold fury born not from insult to himself, but to every man he had served with, every friend buried under foreign soil. Todd didn't notice, didn't see the storm building behind those steady gray eyes. He just kept talking, not realizing he had just lost the most important deal of his miserable career. Samuel rose from his chair slowly. "No deal," he said simply. Todd blinked, confused. Samuel tipped his hat politely. "Good luck finding someone else." Without another word, he turned and walked out the door, slamming shut behind him. Todd stood in the office, blinking stupidly, not understanding what had just happened, but Samuel understood perfectly. He wasn't going to invest a penny into a place that forgot what service truly meant. Instead, he had another investment in mind. That night, Samuel sat at his kitchen table, an old service medal glinting under the lamplight. He turned it slowly between his fingers, thinking of a quiet young man who had chosen dignity over dollars. A young man the world needed more of. Samuel smiled to himself. Tomorrow he would find Evan Cole, and he would offer him something better than a paycheck. He would offer him a mission. Evan Cole spent the next few days buried in odd jobs, fixing a neighbor's lawn mower, replacing brake pads for a friend's sister, patching tires out of the back of his beat-up pickup truck. Anything to keep busy, anything to keep his hands moving and his mind from dwelling on what he had lost. He didn't miss the paycheck, he missed the work, the quiet satisfaction of bringing something broken back to life. The unspoken thank you and a veteran's handshake. He missed feeling like he mattered. On a gray morning heavy with mist, Evan was kneeling beside an old sedan, struggling with a rusted lug nut. When he heard the crunch of tires on gravel behind him, he wiped his hands on a rag, rose slowly, and turned. A tall man stood by a black pickup truck, rugged, calm, weathered by time. There was something familiar about the way he carried himself, not just the boots, not just the jacket, it was the way he stood, solid, unshaken, like a tree that had seen 1,000 storms and still refused to bend. The man stepped forward and offered his hand. "Samuel Hartman," he said. Evan hesitated for a split second, then shook it. "Evan Cole," he replied simply. Samuel nodded as if he already knew. "I heard about what happened at Raymond's," Samuel said, voice low but steady. Evan stiffened slightly, bracing for judgment. for pity, for another lecture about how kindness doesn't pay the bills, but Samuel didn't offer any of that. He just said, "You did the right thing," 3 simple words, but in that moment, they landed heavier than any metal Evan had ever lifted. Samuel glanced around the cracked driveway, the battered truck, the scattered tools. "You deserve better," he said. Evan shrugged, trying to play it off. "I'll manage." Samuel smiled slightly. "I know you will," he said, "but I'm not here to offer you charity." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded brochure. "Garage Valor, coming soon. Service before self. I'm opening a new shop," Samuel said, "a place where veterans and anyone who's been left behind can get the help they need without having to beg for it." He paused, letting the words settle. "I need someone to run it." Evan blinked. "You're offering me a job?" Samuel shook his head, eyes glinting with something stronger than business. "Not just a job, son." He tapped the brochure against his palm. "I'm offering you a mission." For a long moment, Evan said nothing. The mist hung thick in the air. A crow called in the distance. Finally, Evan looked down at his grease-stained hands, the hands that had fixed 100 engines, helped a dozen veterans get just a little farther down the road. He thought about Mr. Hargrove smiling shyly over his repaired truck. He thought about every old soldier who had ever sat quietly in the waiting room, had folded in their lap, carrying battles no one could see, and he thought about what it meant to be needed, truly needed. Evan looked up and met Samuel's gaze. "When do we start?" he asked. Samuel grinned, the kind of grin only men who had seen too much and survived could wear. "Today," he said. And just like that, Evan Cole found himself back where he belonged, not behind someone else's counter, not buried in someone else's rules, but standing at the front of something real, something built not for profit, but for pride, for service, for honor. And he wasn't doing it alone anymore. He had a mission, he had a place, and soon the whole town would know it. What incredible turn awaits this humble mechanic? Stay with Graceful Valor Stories to see. It didn't take long for the news to spread. First, it was the veterans, old friends, who showed up at Garage Valor with battered trucks and stories folded into the lines of their faces. Then, it was the families, young mothers whose husbands were still overseas, grateful for a safe place to bring a broken car and not be judged. And then it was the town itself, the story of Evan Cole, the quiet mechanic who gave more than he ever took, made its way from diner counters to the mayor's office in less than a week. Mayor Helen Carter was not the kind of woman to overlook a story like that. She read the letters pouring in, she heard the murmured thanks in the grocery aisles, she saw the way the town had started to change, the way people smiled more, lingered longer, trusted deeper, and she knew some debts deserved public acknowledgement, some acts of quiet courage deserved to be pulled into the light. 2 weeks after Garage Valor opened its doors, Evan received a letter, hand-delivered by a city official. It was simple, formal, an invitation. "The city of Riverside invites you, Mr. Evan Cole, to attend a special ceremony honoring your service and commitment to our veterans in our community." At the bottom, a handwritten note: "You didn't ask for thanks, but some things deserve to be said anyway." Evan didn't want a spotlight, he had never chased applause, but Samuel Hartman, standing firm with arms crossed by the new hydraulic lift, just grinned and said, "Sometimes standing tall isn't about pride, it's about letting others stand with you." And so that Saturday, Evan put on his cleanest pair of jeans, his least stained boots, and drove his pickup to the town square. The square was packed, flags lined the streets, families clustered under folding tents, veterans stood at attention, old uniforms dusted off for the occasion. When Evan climbed the small wooden platform, the entire square fell silent. Mayor Carter stepped to the microphone. She didn't give a long speech, she didn't need to, she just said, "Today we honor a man who reminded us all that real service doesn't always happen on a battlefield. Sometimes it happens in small garages, in quiet repairs, in hands willing to help without asking why." She turned to Evan, holding out a framed certificate, "For service beyond the call, duty to veterans, to community, to honor itself." The crowd erupted into applause, not polite, not casual, real, raw, grateful. Evan stood there, the certificate heavy in his hands. He didn't smile big, he didn't make a speech, he just nodded once, a small, humble gesture that said everything louder than words ever could. And somewhere in the crowd, Samuel Hartman smiled, a deep, proud smile, knowing the future was in good hands. Later, as Evan stepped down from the platform, dozens of hands reached out to shake his. Old soldiers, young mothers, teenagers in baseball caps. One little boy, no older than 7, tugged on Evan's sleeve and whispered, "Thank you for fixing my dad's truck." Evan knelt down, ruffled the boy's hair, and said quietly, "It was never just about the trucks." And in that simple moment, surrounded by cheers, flags, and gratitude, Evan Cole knew he hadn't lost anything, he had found something better. Garage Valor didn't just survive, it thrived. Within a year, the once empty lot had turned into a living monument of second chances. The parking lot was never emptied. Battered Fords, aging Chevys, motorcycles held together with prayers and duct tape. Inside, the air buzzed with the sounds of laughter, wrenching, and stories being swapped over open hoods. Veterans who once felt invisible found a place where their service wasn't forgotten. Teenagers from the local high school came to learn under Evan's steady hands, not just about engines, but about respect, responsibility, and quiet honor. Evan never talked much about what happened that winter. He never hung his certificate on the wall, never pointed to the day the town cheered his name. He didn't need to. The work spoke for itself. A truck back on the road, a kid who now knew how to fix a flat, a widowed veteran who smiled for the first time in months. That was enough, more than enough. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low and the garage glowed under the amber light, Evan stood outside, arms crossed, surveying the scene. Samuel Hartman leaned against a nearby post, sipping coffee. "You built something good here," Samuel said, his voice rough but warm. Evan shrugged, a small smile tugging at his mouth. "Didn't do it alone," he said. Samuel chuckled. "No one ever does." Later that evening, when the last car pulled out and the tools were packed away, Evan walked to the back wall of the garage to a small plaque Samuel had hung months ago. Without fanfare, he traced the words carved into the brass with a grease-stained finger: "Service before self, for those who remember, for those who refuse to forget." He stood there for a long time, not thinking about the money he had lost at Raymond's, not about the job he had been thrown away from, but about every hand he had shaken, every story he had listened to, every mile he had helped someone travel a little farther. Before leaving for the night, Evan flipped off the main lights, leaving only a small lamp burning by the front door. It was tradition now. The light stayed on all night for any veteran, any traveler, anyone who needed to know there was still a place open for them, a place where dignity wasn't a price you had to pay, a place where kindness wasn't rare, it was expected. Outside, the stars blinked to life one by one, and standing there under the vast open sky, Evan Cole smiled quietly to himself because he knew, without speeches, without ceremonies, he had kept the promise. He had made sure no one who served would ever feel unseen again, not in this town, not in this lifetime, not while Garage Valor stood with its doors open and its light burning against the dark. In our darkest moments, kindness still finds a way, often in the quietest places. Not everyone who helps wants recognition. Some just need to know that today someone isn't going hungry, and sometimes that alone is enough to change a life. You may forget the story, but if no one retells it, history stays silent forever. Subscribe to Graceful Valor Stories, where justice is honored, kindness is remembered, and no act of quiet heroism is ever lost.